Hello there, code lovers. Welcome back to the C++ series. So far we've seen how to use selection structures, we've seen what variables mean, we've introduced the string class and the CMAT class, but it's really a library more than a class, but it's almost the same thing anyways. Remember last time when we did selection structures, we said don't repeat yourself, the dry concept of every programmer. So don't repeat yourself, avoid repeating yourself if it's possible to avoid repeating yourself. And best ways you can do that is using loops, which is what we're going to be doing today. We're introducing loops structures. So a loop is one way of repeating the same line of code over and over again. So, because many times you have to perform the same task over and over again. Let's say if the secretary has to check for the same tag on 100 envelopes. Sometimes it can be good for us, but thanks to tech nowadays, you only have to check your emails, not your envelopes. But you may be checking for the same text maybe in a block of code. Sometimes a loop may be in a game development if you develop games, or if you love games, developing games like I do, then you may be in game development and you want your character to continue playing for as long as possible until the user of course decides to stop the game. So how do you do that with code, and how does that work out? So I'm just going to make a simple file. I'm going to call it loops.cpp. Then just create a loop. Sorry for that. Right. So the three main types of loops: there's a for loop, a while loop, and a do while loop. Right. That's those three main types of loops. So how each one works depends on what you know already about the number of repetitions you want. So if you know the number of repetitions in advance, then you're going to use a for loop. If you don't know the number of repetitions, then you use a while loop, right? So a while loop, if you don't, right? It's that simple. So if you know the number of repetitions, use a for loop. If you don't, use a while loop. There's going to be different ways loops are written depending on the programming language, but then for C++, the convention I'm going to use is C++. So let's say you want to add up numbers from 1 to 100, or you want to find the difference of numbers from 1 to 100, or all sorts of things. We don't know what you'd like to do with your code. That's where we use loops. Right, sorry, just asserting something. Let's say I'm trying to sum with numbers from 1 to 100, or you want to subtract numbers from 1 to 100, or just display the numbers from 1 to 100. That sounds weird saying it a lot. But yeah, let's try to introduce the while loop. I'm just going to say while loop.cpp. Alright, so this introduces the while loop. Now this works if you don't know how many repetitions you want, right? It depends on the user. So include IOStream, I'm just going to write basic C++ structure, namespace std, I'm going to have int n. Okay, so let me make a variable. I'll call that variable counter. It's going to be counting how many times I want to display the number. And it's recommended when you're using loops to initialize your counters or your variables to some number in advance, right? Right. So I'm going to make another one called response. So int response. Okay. Now, first things first, let's try a simple task. I'm going to display numbers from 1 to 10. 1 to 10. Right. But before we go that, I'd like to introduce one very small concept, and that's how you can add in C++. So in C++, it's not really like math. In math, you can say x is equal to x plus 4. That wouldn't make sense. That would mean 0 is equal to 4, right? This would mean 0 is equal to 4, and that wouldn't make sense. But then, this is not math. Remember, you only say equal to with two equal signs. When you use one equal sign, you're assigning. So this statement here, of course, I haven't declared any of those variables, and I'm guessing that red underline error. But this statement here means to the previous value of x, add 4 and assign that as the new value of x. Okay, so the previous value of x, you add 4, you assign that to be the new value of x. Okay, pretty straightforward if you can think of it. Now you can, if you want to add with 1, it's very easy to add it in C++. You can say counter plus plus. This borrows this from C. Some say that's where the name came from, but no. The name came from because C++ is C with classes in it, objects. And we'll understand what object-oriented programming and classes are, but then that's where the name really comes from. It doesn't come from this simple way of adding. But this just means counter is equal to counter plus 1. It means so the previous value of counter, which is 0 in this case, add 1 and assign that as new value of counter. So the new value of counter becomes 1, and you can see that I'll say cout counter. Alright, let me just run that. I'm just going to open my terminal. Okay, I have this error, which usually means I have to restart my IDE. So I'm just going to say X there, and then I restart it. Right, there goes. Guess you run the same code in dev, so no need to worry much. So I have g++ while loop.cpp, and then you can run that. a.exe. Alright, so it's printed out 2. Let me just go back to this. Okay, while loop.cpp. Why 2? Because I added it twice with plus plus, and with this, it's going to print out the value is going to be 1 after this, and after this it's going to be 1 plus 1, which is 2. I can remove that, and you can see it's just going to be 0 to 0, you're adding 1. So let me run that again. I'm just going to say first, so it's printed out 1. Now with that knowledge in mind, I can now run out multiple additions, and I want to print out from 0 to 10. So I'm just going to use a while loop, and I'm going to say while counter is less than 10. Now here I'm using like a for loop because I know how many times I want to run this. I want to print from 1 to 10. I'm just going to say counter plus plus, and then I'll just say cout counter. Okay, so we're going to print out my value of counter from 1 to 10. Let's see how that works. So I'm just going to say g++ while loop.cpp and a.exe. There goes I'm printing out 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Right, pretty fun if you come to think of it. Now let's say I don't know how many times I want to iterate, and it's dependent on user input. So I'll give the user an option. I'll ask them if they want to continue. So cout, would you like to continue? So that's the question. Yes, I would like to continue, and I'll get input from them. So I'll get a response. Now I'll just give extra information. Let 1 mean yes, and let 2 mean no. Right. So I'll say if the response the entered is equal to 1. Again, only 2 in C++. You will have to use 3 in JavaScript. So if response event is equal to 1, I'm just going to say cout. You have decided to, let me make this interesting. Let me ask, would you like to stop? So you have decided to stop. Else, cout, you have decided to continue. Now we need a way of stopping this, of course, and I have to change my loop sentinel. So what's the loop sentinel? It's this condition right here. It's what determines whether the loop is going to continue or not. So whenever the loop executes, it goes back and checks the sentinel, which is the condition. It's almost like the if else. It's checking if this condition is met. If what's here is true, then continues the loop. If not, then it ends the loop. Again, it's recommended just put return zero there. Just know where C++ file is ending or your main function, sorry, is ending. So let's try make a boolean variable. So boolean is after of course to introduce that. So I'm going to create run and I'll make it true. So run is going to be equal to true. And I just say while run. So that's going to mean while true. This has no way of stopping it. And we're going to ask the user if they're saying yes, they want to stop, then we'd make run equal to false. So the next time it checks the condition, run is going to be equal to false and it will stop. If not, then it's just going to be printing out what I have here. Okay. Let's try to run that. So I have G++ while loop to CPP. Alright, so it's printed out one. Would you like to stop? Yeah. Alright, so let's try to. Okay, so this has no way of ending. Alright, you decided to continue. Let me just end that. It looks like there's an error with my code. So if the response is 1, it's going to ask if they would like to stop. Okay, you decided to stop. Yeah, and it's going to say run equal to false. Well, of course, you don't know why that's working. That's not working. And then if it's not, then it's going to okay, you've decided to continue and it's going to keep on going. So let me try to save it and try to run it again. I haven't seen anything wrong with the code. So let's try. So would you like to stop? Yes, sharp. We decided to stop. Okay, that's what I wanted. Now let's try to run it again. Would you like to stop? No, no. So it's printing out the loops. As you can see, I'm printing out 4, 6, and it keeps on going 7. So this has no limit. I can go on up to forever. As you can see, this is 25. And then whenever I say yes, I'd like to stop, it's going to stop. So helpful if you're making a game or if you're making something where you don't know how many repetitions you have to do, and the repetitions depend on user input. It's helpful to use a while loop instead of other types of loops. So that's was introduction to while loops, everyone. In the next lesson, we're going to introduce a for loop, and as we keep on talking about control structures.